All right, welcome back. Nate here. What we'll be covering in this video is actually building an experiment, particularly from the planning stages and all of the great features that go into helping you build really the smartest experiment you can. So then once you actually get into the lab, you're being as efficient with your time as possible. So first, pretty simple. If you go over to this new experiment button, it'll launch the actual experiment builder. And I went ahead and already added a name for our experiment. We've had people do everything from use sample IDs to dates to technology driven. Think of this really just like a file name. But just to quickly orient what's going on here, just because there is a lot that we'll dive deeper in other videos. One of the important things, you'll see this little flag up here that indicates that it's a draft experiment. Really what that means is that treat this a lot like a draft document. It's designed to really be fluid and help you in your planning process, so then you can have, say, multiple experiments before deciding which one to actually go into the lab and run, just to use your lab to use that time so much more efficiently. And then we'll be talking a little bit more about creating protocols and cloning later. But one thing that is going to be important in this state is this share button. This is when we're going to actually include other people in our lab to get their feedback before we go and run one of these experiments in the lab. Because as you well know, a lot of times these experiments can take upwards of 40 plus hours. But we'll be covering the specifics on exactly how sharing works in another video. But before that, this middle section is talking about just some general information about this experiment. So of course, here's our project title up at the top. We have an experiment name. And then between our objective and our measure of success, this is actually a really important, solid exercise to use during this planning process. Really, what are you trying to accomplish? Whether it's something as simple as trying to figure out a good way to consistently clean wafers, or something more complicated. And then as applicable, it's how are you actually going to measure it? And then of course this is simply to be able to add research papers that you found, maybe images, maybe spin curves if you're talking about specific chemicals, etc. Well, down here at the bottom, I've added a couple of processes to show what things will start to look like, but pretty straightforward. Keeping in mind, so an experiment really is built up of a series of processes, right? So one process would probably be, in this case, maybe the number 3 wafer recipe, and we can quickly look at what exactly that is. I mean, first by placing the wafer on a hot plate for 45 seconds, etc. And then the second piece of that, once we have it, is going through our photolithography process using negative tone resist. So again, this is just an example. If you wanted to start by adding an additional one, obviously pretty easy to understand, add another. So now that we're going to add an additional process to our experiment, pretty quickly you start to type, you'll see C processes populate that are used both by your lab, and we'll talk later on what it means between these orange known processes versus your user process. But right now, the important thing to understand, let's say we want to use this version 2 of the bilayer sol-gel process, you'll see a quick preview as to what the steps involved are to make sure that this is what you're looking for. And then by hitting done, you'll notice that pretty quickly here it is down at the bottom, and now we have it here. And then there's pretty simple things like dragging and dropping. Maybe you want to do the bilayer process second, cool. Or maybe you want to add another clean step between the two. That's also possible. Simply dragging and dropping there. So now, as this starts to become more and more processes and process steps, that's when the share and collaboration feature becomes really useful. And this is where Hula starts to show off a little bit. When we're developing processes, controlling those variables is one of the most important, so then you can focus on developing that next process. You'll see some of these alert icons here on the right, which are helping guide where we're making better decisions so that you're not wasting your time in the lab. And we'll be covering all of that more in later videos. All right, that's it for this one. In part 2 of this draft experiment series, we'll be diving a little bit more into how you'll be able to build really smarter experiments. And remember, the end goal of all of this is so that once you actually get into the lab, you're able to be more efficient with your time, but then you're actually developing better processes a whole lot faster. So until then, head on over to support.projecthula.com if you have any questions. And of course, shoot us an email, find us on Twitter. All right, guys, talk to you soon.